Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here at JSAC presenting one of our latest investigations. This presentation is titled NSPX30, a sophisticated adversary-in-the-middle enabled implant evolving since 2005. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Facundo Munoz, and I have been working for ISET since 2021. Before I became a malware researcher, I was doing reverse engineering out of my own curiosity. And then the wonderful people at ISET decided that it was time for me to have a real job hunting and analyzing APT malware. So this is my first time in Japan, and I'm very, very excited to be here in this amazing country. Before we dive into the details, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of my colleagues at ISET Research that helped me with this investigation. In this presentation, I will tell you the story of how we discovered this implant that we named NSPX30, and our research into its evolution and attribution to a threat actor that we named Blackboot APT. We will discuss a specific case in which the attackers compromise a machine via adversary in the middle, and I will tell you some nice technical details about the implant. Before I finish the presentation, I will briefly talk about other groups that we are tracking with similar capabilities. One second. So our investigation begins with a search of detections in a system located in China. This system had become what we commonly refer to as a magnet of threats. The system was targeted by several groups at the same time. One was Basic Panda, Luoyu, and one threat actor that we track as Little Bear. All of them are China-aligned APTs. But there was also a set of files that didn't belong to the toolkits associated to these groups. So we started thinking that there was another actor behind it. These were the first components of the NSPX30 implant that we detected, and the only ones that we had for a long time. It was 2 years later that we had a breakthrough when the attackers attempted to compromise another system that we managed to get more samples and build a more comprehensive picture of the implant and how every component is related to each other. So as you can see, the implant is divided into many small modules, some of which are encrypted on disk, and some of which we have only detected in memory. Now that we had all of these components, it was time for us to think about the attribution. But as it is almost always the case, the attribution is never easy when it comes to China-aligned APTs. We started looking into the code and found many similar samples in our collection. We noticed that with each new sample, we were going further and further back in time according to their compilation timestamps. And in many cases, the internal registration of when our detection engineers created the signatures for those samples. So we traced the evolution of the implant to almost 20 years back in the past. Project Wood is the earliest ancestor of the modern NSPX30 implant, dating back to at least 2005. Many variants were created from Project Wood with new features or different file arrangements. One of them was named DCM, also known as Dark Spectre, and it was active for almost a decade. We believe that NSPX30 is the successor of DCM. So as you can imagine, this is one of the oldest families of implants that is still evolving. So it is a very interesting opportunity to study something like this that takes us back to the early years of cyber espionage operations from China-aligned APTs, since there is only a few groups that we know that were operating prior to 2005. So at ESET, we received many samples from many sources. Even now, we received samples for the first time that were compiled any number of years ago. In the case of the oldest Project Wood sample that we had, we wanted to know if it was really that old. So we first checked the PE compilation timestamps, which indicated January 9 of 2005. And there was only a 17-second difference between the compilation of the dropper and the backdoor. While this seems consistent, timestamps can be faked by the attackers, so therefore we look at other data points. The dropper was compressed with the popular UPX tool, and the tool inserts its version in the new binary during compression. So by looking at the version, we found that UPX 1.24 was released in 2003, before the compilation of the sample. Finally, the rich header indicated that the tool chain and libraries used during compilation was that of Visual Studio 6, which was released in 1998, before the compilation of the samples. So we assess with high confidence that it is unlikely that the attackers consistently modified all of these pieces of data. We found no deliberate signs of timestamp modifications on neither Project Wood, DCM, nor NSPX30. When looking at the uncompressed sample of the dropper, we noticed that there was an unused string in the table in the resource section. The string read Peerwood C often, which we believe is the name of the project. We found a lot of similarities between Project Wood and an open source remote administration tool called PeerU, and which seems to have been publicly released in 2001. The source code contains many comments in Chinese language, and we only found it in Chinese websites that require payment. So maybe that's why its popularity has decreased in the last decade. Similar to other projects such as Ghost Rat or Poison Ivy from around the same time, there were many malicious variants of this tool, and they kept popping up during our research. But they did not have the customizations that Project Wood developers added to their implant, like custom socket handling code, configuration, among many other things. Now, thanks to the excellent work of other malware research in the past, neither Project Wood nor DCM managed to stay hidden for 20 years. And we found several public reports about these implants. In 2011, we saw the first major report about Project Wood by Frankie Lee for the SANS Institute. And we believe that Project Wood was used to target a politician from Hong Kong. Now, it is my understanding that Mr. Frankie Lee will be presenting later today. So I would like to take this opportunity to say that your report continues to be excellent 30 years later. So in 2021, we had the first report about the DCM implant by a Chinese company called Hianming. The original report is lost, but a copy can still be found in a Chinese forum. In 2014, the company G-Data published a report about a campaign that they named Operation 2Hash, that was later attributed to the Gelsemium APT. We were quite surprised to find that the rootkit that the researchers named DirectX in the report is a variant of Project Wood. In 2016, Tencent published a report about DCM where they call it Dark Spectre, noting the adversary-in-the-middle capabilities of the attackers. The original post is also lost to time, but we could still find several copies in Chinese forums and blogs where there was heavy commentary about it and speculation and some very mysterious stories about this implant. In 2023, with all of these new samples, we were able to investigate the past of these implants and classify this new cluster under the name Blackwood. And here ends the historical part of this presentation. Now let's talk about Blackwood's profile. So Blackwood is a China-aligned cyber espionage group active since at least 2018, targeting Chinese and Japanese individuals and companies. Blackwood has capabilities to conduct adversary-in-the-middle attacks to deliver the implant that we named NSPX30 through updates of legitimate software, and to hide the location of its command and control servers by intercepting the traffic that is generated by the implant. The attacks that are carried out by Blackwood are highly targeted, and when the attackers fail to compromise their target or lose access to a previously compromised system, they attempt to regain access in a short period of time. In the United Kingdom, Blackwood targeted a Chinese-speaking student of a high-profile university. In China, they targeted individuals, a local manufacturing company, and a Japanese engineering and manufacturing company. And here in Japan, Blackwood also targeted individuals. So now it is time for us to talk about the technical details of our investigation. We'll begin analyzing a particular case that occurred in 2022, the breakthrough that I mentioned earlier, in which the victim received the implant through a legitimate update protocol. This is a graphical representation of what we observed in our telemetry. When we discover a new attack, a legitimate component called Tencent DL.exe from the popular Tencent QQ software downloaded a malicious DLL from a legitimate server and deployed it on disk. Then the QQ.exe process loaded the malicious DLL in memory, executing it. Other victims also received the dropper via software updates from Chinese applications such as Sugou Pinyin and WPS Office. But it is not the first time that these three applications have been hijacked, as we noticed that other APTs using adversary-in-the-middle also compromise targets by hijacking the updates of these applications. But in a recent case, the attackers attempted via Windows and Google Chrome updates, and the mission failed. The implant is not signed with the required certificates to pass verification. And we also observed that DCM and the implants from the Luoyu APT were delivered via these updates as well. So what we learned from this attack is that the attackers hijack updates through the unencrypted HTTP protocol for initial access to the machines in the networks. And since all of those softwares belong to different companies, we did not suspect of a supply chain attack. According to ESET telemetry, the IP address of the servers from where the download originated are from legitimate infrastructure operated by the companies that develop these softwares. So it's not something that we can easily detect, like redirection to a malicious server via DNS, as we'll see later in this presentation. The dropper that is received in the malicious updates can be a DLL or an exe file and can be inside of a zip archive if needed. Now we'll talk about the implant itself and how it was designed. The implant relies fully on the attacker's capability for traffic interception, not only for its delivery, but to hide its real infrastructure. I will talk about this in more details in a few minutes. Where most malware establishes persistence for execution, NSPX30 developers took full advantage of its persistent technique. It registered one of its loaders as a WinSock namespace package, hence the name NSP. Every time the system loads a WinSock in a new process, the malicious namespace package is automatically loaded in the process, and it launches the orchestrator. The implant is fragmented into small subunits, and this allows the attackers to progressively deploy its capabilities, making it more difficult for researchers to build the toolkit. The orchestrator and the backdoor have their own groups of plugins that are deployed in later stages by request of the attackers. The loading chain of the implant is quite nice, but too long to explain. So I will skip it and talk about the orchestrator. When the orchestrator is loaded, it creates two threads. The first thread checks if the backdoor is present on disk, and if it's not, it downloads it and decrypts the backdoor DLL and then loads it in memory. The second thread gets the name of the current process to decide which plugin to load. Similarly, if the process belongs to a specific security software, it will perform the allow listing of its loaders. The orchestrator has its own set of plugins. The file names begin with the letter C. And as far as we know, based on the orchestrator code, there are 6 plugins that it can load. The plugins are downloaded by the backdoor by request of the attackers. And for example, we only found plugins 1, 2, and 3, and we are missing the rest that we know that are loaded in the process of applications such as Skype, Telegram, and WeChat. The orchestrator plugin number 1 and 2 target the Tencent QQ application. Both implement different techniques to acquire some similar information to maximize its chances of collecting data. The plugin number 1 takes advantage of an insecure password protection scheme in Tencent QQ. If the attackers have access to the machine running the software, it is possible to gather unique system information that is combined to create a key to decrypt a master key that is stored in a QQ database called registry.db. The master key is then used to decrypt the rest of the QQ databases and steal information such as credentials, messages, and more. The second plugin hooks the functions in memory from 2 QQ DLLs, and this allows the plugin to intercept all of the SQL statements that are issued on the databases and intercept in plain text all of the messages that are sent or received via private or group chats. The third plugin targets the applications such as Skype, hijacking the APIs of 2 Windows DLLs, allowing for the interception of output and input streams of audio and recording everything in MP3 format. At this point, I think we can say that interception appears to be the favorite technique of these attackers. Now I will describe how the orchestrator allows its loaders in some selected security software, including Tencent PC Manager, 360 Safeguard and Antivirus, and Kingsoft Antivirus. We believe that they choose these products especially because they are quite popular with Chinese-speaking users, and of course the allow listing is quite easy to achieve. Here is an example of how they achieved the allow listing for Tencent PC Manager. The code loads a legitimate DLL from the software that provides an internal interface that is used by the orchestrator to request the allow listing of its loaders' DLLs. We haven't seen this technique by any other malware so far. In 360 Safeguard software, the orchestrator uses a similar technique, loading the software DLLs and calling its APIs. But for 360 Antivirus, they operate the database file manually. When I look at this code, I was expecting something amazing. But the technique is very simple. They create the binary structure containing some hard-coded data in the path to the malicious DLL. The structure is encoded in base 64 and then appended to the database. Amazing. And for Kingsoft Antivirus, similarly to the previous technique, they use an interface from Kingsoft DLL. And this technique, we have only seen it in the orchestrator of NSPX30. Finally, as a bonus mention, for Windows Defender, the allow listing is performed by the installer component by executing two commands in PowerShell. One disables the sample submission and the other adds an exclusion for the malicious loader. So Windows Defender was even easier than the rest. Not even a little bit of reverse engineering required to achieve it. Now we'll talk a little bit about how the backdoor works. The backdoor is actually quite small, and most of its functionality is about administration of the plugins and exfiltration of collated data. But it can also communicate with the CNC server and receive commands to, for example, open a reverse shell and do some basic file operations. The backdoor has its own set of plugins that come embedded in it, and we have seen only 3. And they do keylogging, screenshots, and collect information about the installed software. During our research, we also found plugins in memory that collect files and create recordings with the computer camera. So it appears that the attacker were interested in more than just data. So as I mentioned previously, the developers maximize NSPX30 reliance on the attacker's capability for traffic interception, not only for its initial access, but also to hide the real infrastructure when contacted by the backdoor and the orchestrator. Sadly, we don't know how exactly is that the attackers achieve interception. So we formulated a hypothesis based on our previous experience with this kind of APTs. We believe that first, the attackers compromise a network device, for example, a router, with an implant that has the adversary in the middle capabilities. When a legitimate software running in the machine in the network attempts to update, the implant intercepts the unencrypted traffic and replies with a malicious package containing the backdoor. the dropper, sorry. Now with the target compromised, the network implant listens for packets generated by the backdoor and the orchestrator. Those packets are sent to legitimate infrastructure operated by Baidu. And we believe that the network implant relays them to the real attacker's infrastructure. For the network implant, it will be very easy to discover these packets, even though they look quite legitimate. For example, we captured this GET request from the orchestrator when it was attempting to download the backdoor. The request is sent to Baidu's website via HTTP. The parameters are custom and provide the network implant with information about the NSPX30 ID, the architecture, and the operating system versions. If you try this request on your browser, the server will just show you an error message. And lastly, the user agent is extremely old, masquerading as Internet Explorer on Windows 98. So maybe the developers are trying to say that they are really old school people. The backdoor component is passive and only communicates when a request comes from the outside via UDP protocol. It uses the same port where it listens for communication to send DNS queries in which it exfiltrates the collected data. It is also quite easy to fingerprint. For example, the packets are sent to Baidu's network, alternating between 3 different ports with a transaction ID that is always the same and attempts to resolve the domain for Microsoft.com. More importantly, there is data appended to the query. One interesting detail from this is that the developers decided that with every packet that is sent during exfiltration, the destination IP address increases by 1. So eventually, it could find a real DNS server from Baidu. For example, Baidu's public DNS server, but the backdoor does not really expect any reply from the server. So in previous editions of the JSAC conference, people from Team T5 and Kaspersky presented a fantastic research about the LuoU APT. Another sophisticated APT group that has been operating since 2008 and with very similar capabilities to Blackwood. In the blog post by Kaspersky, there was some speculation that LuoU might have compromised internet infrastructure to be able to conduct adversary on the side interception. But when it comes to Blackwood, we consider the following points. Blackwood adversary in the middle has global reach, since not all of their targets are located in China. Some of the servers from Baidu located in that range where the backdoor sends its DNS queries are anycasted, so they could be located anywhere around the world. During our test, for example, no packets seem to go through Chinese infrastructure. The adversary in the middle seems highly reliable, because exfiltration requires a lot of packets and time. So our assessment is that ISP compromise for adversary in the middle is unlikely, and that the network implant must be located closer to the victims. So we would like to take this opportunity to also report about other groups that we are tracking at ESET that are using adversary in the middle to deliver its implants. The evasive panda APT group, also known as Bronze Highland and Daggerfly, has been operating since at least 2012. In 2023, we reported that they started using adversary in the middle since at least 2020. And according to our telemetry, first against Chinese-speaking users in China, and now recently in other countries. Little Bear is a threat actor that has not been publicly documented to the best of our knowledge, that uses a well-developed toolkit and has been active since at least 2020, targeting Chinese-speaking users in Hong Kong, Taiwan, New Zealand, and the United States, and of course, China. And sadly, for all of these APTs, we don't know how exactly is that they do the adversary in the middle. But I cannot live today without telling you that we have one exception. The Wizard APT, and this threat actor has been active since at least 2021, conducting cyber espionage operations against individuals in China and gambling companies outside of China. They use two backdoors that are delivered via adversary in the middle, a simple one we named WizardNet, and a more complex, fully featured surveillance backdoor that we named Dark Knights. For this group, we know exactly how they achieve interception. They use a custom lateral movement tool that we named Spellbinder that performs IPv6 stateless address auto-configuration spoofing attack. The possibilities of these attacks were described as early as 2008 by the Internet Engineering Task Force. It takes advantage of IPv6 neighbor discovery protocol in which the ICMPv6 router advertisement messages advertise that an IPv6 capable router is present in the network, so that hosts that support IPv6 or are soliciting an IPv6 router can adopt the advertising device as their default gateway. First, a compromised machine running Spellbinder sends ICMPv6 router advertisement messages to all the nodes in the network. IPv4 and IPv6 enabled machines receive the message and auto-configure using stateless address auto-configuration, using the information in the message. Then the victim machine with updating software sends a DNS request over IPv6 to the machine running Spellbinder. Spellbinder replies with the IPv4 address of the malicious server controlled by the attackers. The updating software running on the victim machine sends an HTTP request over IPv4 to the malicious server asking for updates. And the server replies with a payload. So the first time that we observed these campaigns in which the wizards use Spellbinder, we saw dozens of machines compromised in networks in just a few minutes, making it a very effective technique to perform adversary-in-the-middle attacks. Since starting from Windows Vista and Server 2008, IPv6 is enabled by default on Windows. So we have finally reached the end of this presentation. I believe that the phrase, "this is just the tip of the iceberg," applies when it comes to Blackwood and the evolution of their implants, as well as cyber espionage operations using adversary in the middle. On the side of what we know, we have the implant for Windows, and I'm very happy to tell you that Project Wood for Linux was recently found by one of my colleagues. And there is a threat actor that is actively attacking networks using that implant. But many more mysteries remain on the side of the unknown. We have seen many variants of the implants over the years, with varying degrees of improvements. Project Wood was deployed in a campaign by Gelsemium, but we have not seen Gelsemium deploying neither DCM nor NSPX30. So, is it possible that there is a digital quartermaster that develops these implants for different actors? From what we observed, we believe that the attacks are highly targeted, and the operators of NSPX30 deploy their toolkit selectively to conduct surveillance. In some cases, the victims are just individuals and not large organizations with networks and servers that are exposed to the internet. So the question is, how can the attackers accurately find their victims in the vastness of the internet? We can only speculate that perhaps the attackers have a mechanism in place to identify their targets from a traffic generated by Chinese applications when it's passing through Chinese infrastructure. For example, Citizen Lab and McAfee reported that applications such as QQ Browser, WeChat, and Sugo Pinyin will send data in insecure protocols that will allow the attackers to de-anonymize and track the users. Finally, to the best of our knowledge, there is no publicly documented network implant with these capabilities described in this investigation. So what a better place than JSAC to build upon previous research that has been presented here, and ask all of you today to reach out to us if you have any information that can help us understand this threat and protect the users. So to read more details about this investigation, please check our blog post, which should be live on welivesecurity.com. Thank you.
We'd like to move on to the QA session. If you have any question about this presentation, please come to the microphone stand at 4 different places at the venue. If you cannot address all the questions, we have a Slack that you can post your questions, and we will address your questions as much as possible. Do you have any questions? Any questions from the audience? So maybe there is no question from the audience. We can end this session. Thank you, Mr. Munoz.